Hold it. You're on.
Good evening. My name is Marjorie Gans, and I'm a member of the board of the Writers' Room of Boston. I'm delighted that you could join us this evening for the fourth reading in our virtual series, Readings from the Room. For anyone new to us, the Writers' Room is a co-working space in downtown Boston for any and all writers, established and emerging, who want or need a quiet place to write. The room is open 24 hours a day and it provides desks and silence. We launched this new reading series as a way to reach out to the writing community during the pandemic and share wonderful writing, some by writers who have called or call now the Writers' Room home. Tonight, we are really pleased to have Mary Bonina, a writer of poetry, memoir, and fiction, and Laysha Ostrow, who writes both fiction and nonfiction and is a member of the board of the Writers' Room. She's also a researcher and consultant specializing in the inclusion of people with lived experience in the mental health system. Mary and Laysha will read from their work, and then we'll open it to a larger discussion with some time for questions and answers at the end. As the reading goes along, please feel free to use the comments feature in the box at the bottom of the screen where you can type in your questions, and I will read from those at the end. This series is made possible by grants from the Mass Cultural Council and the Boston Cultural Council, and we also rely on friends. If you enjoy this program, please consider making a contribution using the donate button at the bottom of your screen. Also, we will be recording this reading and a replay will be available later. We begin the evening with Mary Bonina. She is a voiceover artist for books recorded for the blind. She is the author of My Father's Eyes, a memoir, and 2 poetry collections, Living Proof and Clear Eye Tea. Her completed novel, My Way Home, is currently making the rounds to publishers. As winner of the Boston Contemporary Authors Urban Arts Prize, her poem Drift is installed as a permanent public art outside the Green Street MBTA station in Jamaica Plain. A Pushcart Prize nominee, her work has been published in many journals and anthologies. She earned her MFA in fiction at Warren Wilson College and is a fellow at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, where she was named first alternate for the Goldfarb Family Fellowship and also awarded a residency at the Moulin à Neuf in Auvergne, France. She has also been the recipient of a full residency fellowship at Vermont Studio Center. Her essays have been published in Poets and Writers, Adelaide, and Oven che Siamo. Her website is marybonina.com. Mary, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. I'm going to be reading tonight from My Way Home, a novel as yet unpublished. I'm going to read from the beginning of the novel. You're going to meet Claire, the protagonist, and the other main character, Ray. And this is the moment when Claire discovers him in her life again in a really big way. And his presence is going to challenge her to face secrets kept and to make choices that were long ago denied her. My Way Home. 1. Claire, 1984. I parked the car in front of the conservatory, and Danielle immediately opened her door and jumped out, practically before I'd braked. She rushed up the steps to the building, and I hurried to follow. She didn't want to be late for her lesson, and if she had been, it wouldn't have been on my account. By the time I caught up with her, she was heading downstairs to the practice studio, not calling out, as she usually did, that she'd meet me at the window seat. I headed to that favorite corner of the lobby, and when I got there, realized that I had no book to read, and that rushing out of my office, I hadn't even taken a notebook and pen with me. I wasn't surprised to be so scattered. I was tired from teaching all day. I was more than ready to be home, stretched out on the couch, half watching some television program that didn't really interest me. I was hungry too, with none of the snacks I used to carry around for Danielle. It was impossible to keep up with this eating for two business, and Dr. Aviva had recently grilled me to learn how much I'd been eating lately. Your baby needs proper nutrition, snacks, small meals, several times a day, she advised. I ought to be traveling with a picnic basket. Music was coming from the smaller recital rooms, the sound of strings and a flute player in the outer corridor. And in Wolfenson 103 down the hall, a soprano was singing, reminding me of when I'd been a schoolgirl and was given a solo with the chorus. All that was behind me now. When the hour changed and the musicians I'd heard finished with their practice, it got very quiet and chilly, too. I thought maybe a door or window had been opened somewhere in the building. May evenings in New England were still cool, even if it had been a day as warm as this one. When the drafty silence was broken by the sound of a saxophone improvisation, I realized that the cooler air was rising from below. There was an open vent under the window seat. Whoever was playing downstairs was accomplished. I thought it might be Danielle's new teacher. I saw a concert brochure someone had left on the bench across from me. I picked it up and flipped through it, thinking that since it had been a jazz concert, perhaps my stepdaughter's new saxophone coach had played. I didn't even know his name. Her mother, Veronica, a colleague of his here, had arranged the lessons with him. Then I saw the name, Ray Newell. My hand shook. I stared hard at it, as if that would change it or make it disappear. This couldn't be. The program fell to the floor. I bent down to pick it up and stood upright too quickly, nearly losing my footing. I was shaking, my legs were leaden, and I was lightheaded, but I could move, so I went carefully and slowly down the corridor to the area the older students and parents jokingly referred to as leur bistro, a fake cafe without real food or coffee, just a bank of vending machines and a microwave oven. Across the way there was a small room enclosed by a wall that went only halfway up. As open as the place was, it didn't really serve as the refuge it was meant to be. Although this could hardly be considered a comfortable spot, outfitted as it was with spindly metal furniture made to look like cast iron, furniture that would have been more appropriately placed in a garden or on a patio, I could nevertheless sit out of the way and try to calm down while reading in a better light the capsule biography of Ray Newell. Mr. Newell is new to the conservatory this year. He received his undergraduate degree from McGill University and a Master of Science in Modern American Music from the Royal Canadian Academy of Music. All I knew was the teacher was from Canada. Not in a million years would I have believed that Ray Newell would re-enter my life after such a long time, and never in this way, as music coach for Danielle. My heart pounded at the possibility of seeing him again. I remembered what a good sax player he was, how music had been the most important thing in his life. The Ray in the headshot had graying hair. It would be, just as mine might be if I didn't color it. And he was filled out again as the Ray I once loved would be, a man now and not the boyish teenager. He just might be the same person, in spite of changes that had come with age. Had anyone ever mentioned my name to him? Danielle had her father's surname. I hadn't changed my name from Rantel to Harris when I married Martin. But if this is the same Ray Newell and he had heard my name, would he even remember me after all these years had passed? And if so, what would that be like? What would he say? What would I say? I heard someone coming down the hallway in the direction of Le Bistro, maybe Danielle, finished with her lesson, ready to head out and looking for me, not finding me in my usual spot. I looked at my watch. An hour had not quite passed, though, and besides, these were the footfalls of a man. He was coming down the corridor, still in the shadows, maybe just passing through on his way to somewhere else. He had a confident and determined stride, as if he were on a mission, and from the sound of it, he was wearing boots. As he turned to go into the vending area, I saw them, red cowboy boots. He stood with his back to me, fishing in a pocket of his jeans, coming up with change to feed the cold drink vending machine. There was a sudden thud of the full plastic bottle dropping down, and he reached in to retrieve it. Now that he had his drink, he went over to the stack of the new issue of Bostonia on the floor and grabbed one. He stood there, leaning on the counter, flipping through the paper, his back still to the open doorway of the room where I was sitting. Maybe he was looking for something in the free paper, checking an event listing, the only reason anyone cared about the paper that was full of advertising. He started to move. Was he headed for the next corridor leading to the mailroom or the library? I watched as he folded it up and put it in the back in the stack of them. He turned then, not to go on his way, but to head into the seating area to drink his Coke. He was coming right at me. I felt my heart jump, and then strangely, a rush of warmth filled my empty stomach. I knew that this was Ray Newell. Danielle or Veronica must have told him I'd be waiting for the lesson to finish, or he must have seen or heard my name. "Hello," I said, looking up at him. He towered over me. I should stand, I thought. I didn't think I could. "And hello to you," he said. He spoke politely and formally, as if he didn't really know who I was, but was just being friendly because we were the only two people in the small room. "Ray Newell," he said, his hand stretched out to me. "Don't you know who I am?" I asked. When I stood, I realized that I still felt weak. He was talking, but there was no possibility of hearing anything he was saying right now. I was lost in his unusual green eyes and his open face that was both familiar and strange, the way a face you once knew so well becomes after so many years. He'd left in 1968, and this was 1984. 16 years had passed. "Claire, Claire Rantel," I said, swallowing my surname. "Your students, Danielle's stepmom." "Claire? Claire?" He seemed genuinely shocked. This had to be an act. I was having none of it. And why had he left Danielle when her lesson wasn't over? Perhaps he'd given her something to practice, to allow him to come talk to me. Or maybe she was packing up her stuff and getting ready to be on her way to find me. I didn't want her to find me here like this, shaken up by this encounter with her teacher. "You never wrote, and you didn't wait for me. I went to meet you, and you left without me, and you didn't write. I didn't know where you were." Ray Newell stood there, looking shocked. "Oh, I did. I wrote to you. You never answered. Why, Claire? Why didn't you ever answer my letters?" "You left. I went to meet you. We were going to go together," I said. "I couldn't. The driver wouldn't wait." "You could have waited for me. You said you would." "I was there. You left." I held the rolled up concert program in hand. I was trying not to slouch, consciously trying to straighten up, trying at least not to fall over, but I didn't suggest sitting down in one of the flimsy metal chairs in front of a table that wobbled. I didn't want to prolong this conversation. I wanted him to leave, to get back to Danielle's lesson, or if it was over, for him to go before she showed up. "Did you come looking for me?" He ignored the larger question in that, of how it had happened that he'd come home to Massachusetts and taken on my stepdaughter as a student. It seemed an impossible coincidence. "I thought Veronica had driven Danielle to the lesson. I was just going to say hello. She told me your stepmom had, so I thought I'd introduce myself. I didn't know. If I'd known you were here, that Danielle was your stepdaughter, I would never have taken this job," he said. "Nice to see you again, too," I said. "Thank you."
Thank you, Mary. That was wonderful. And I should also mention that Mary is a longtime member of the room. Okay.
A lifer
So
almost.
a good testimonial for the room.
Right.
So our second reader is Laysha Ostrow, who is a member of the board of the Writers' Room. She lives on the central coast of California with her husband and Chihuahua. She writes about belonging, connection, and dignity as forms of personal resistance against institutional forces. Her creative writing has been published in Storgy, in Idle Inc., and she is a member of the Association of Writers and Writing Programs and on the board of the Writers' Room. Laysha holds a PhD from Johns Hopkins University and a master's degree from Brandeis University. She enjoys small brushes with wildlife, gourmet cooking, and listening to local radio. Laysha is also the founder and CEO of a public health consulting company, and you could read more about her writing at layshaostrow.com. Laysha.
Thanks, Marjorie. It's great to be here and to be on the board of the Writers' Room. I live in California now, but I grew up in the Boston area, and my parents actually live right around the corner from the room. So I'll be reading today from a short story that will be published on Friday in Idle Ink. And you can see it then at idleink.org, or there'll be a link on my website, which Marjorie mentioned. 3:33 a.m. every night for the past 6 weeks, in the long moments before dawn, far away but imminent. The sleeplessness wasn't just annoying, it was persecutory. Waking in a pool of her own sweat, blazing like she was running in her dreams, chased by demons. Quickly falling into sleep only to be woken with a start. And why 3:33? Or was it sometimes 3:23, or 3:43, or even 4:33? Marjorie had an issue of The Atlantic flipped open on her nightstand to the last page, where there was a regular column on life by a male staff writer. He said, first and foremost, you have to get up, not lie there and let it have its way with you. What could a man know of this, she thought in her worst moments? What could a man know about waking every night for going on months now, with months and months and years ahead of her? How could he know what it was like for the sleeplessness and the heat to intersect cruelly with the responsibilities of middle age? Not when there was her husband Mark, slumbering peacefully next to her, having his way with sleep and not the other way around. On really bad nights, it was 2:23 and then she'd get up. Then it was still 4 hours until sunrise this time of year, but only 4 hours since she'd fallen asleep, and bitterly only 1 or 2 hours since Mark had come to bed, counting on his 8 hours when he wanted them. Then Marjorie would reach around in the dark for a sweatshirt, trying not to wake the dog, God, not the dog, and make her way down the hall, past where Sloane was tucked in, sleeping like the tween she was becoming, like a baby, her baby. Marjorie smoothed her fingers along the wall for where the oak cabinets ended, sidestepped through the archway, and parted the curtains to slide the heavy glass door open, feeling the suction lining pop. Her right shoulder hurt from the heft it took to open this door, especially when the nights were warm like they were in late summer on the California coast. Mark would never notice, although he'd probably fix it if she asked, or at least he'd say he would, even if she ended up having to call a repair person. Marjorie stepped out onto the patio and felt the darkness circle around her. When the moon was full, it shed a comforting light, even though it made the sleeplessness worse. But the moon was new and the stars lit the sky from behind, like a glass dome standing on top of the earth, and the lights of a faraway metropolis glowing from beyond. She vowed to stay off screens, but what else was there to do? Night moves were restricted to reviewing, composing, commenting. Even reading a book involved turning on a light and disrupting the darkness. Everything to do was a screen, except the things she wanted to do but couldn't. Run up into the scrub oak forest behind the house and join the howling coyotes. Get in the car and leave with no destination, and plea bargain for bitterness later when she returned and had sparked a fight with Mark about whatever was happening to their family. The night sky was the only way. She was lucky to have it. The midnight hot flashes had started right about Labor Day when she found Mark's brother with their daughter Sloane in the beach grass on the dunes. I know what I saw, she told Mark as soon as they got home that night, although she wasn't entirely sure that she did. Babe, I hear you, but you got to know, Ben's just like that. He's not, he's just not. You don't know that. I don't know that. She saw a familiar look of impatience flash across his face. You get the shit about my family from your mother. You two have always had it in for them. And with that, she backed down. Mark's was an old California family, closely related to the landed aristocracy that ranched cattle on unceded acres up the coast, with a comfortable network of extended relatives and investment properties. An old family for an unincorporated area that was only what was left of the Wild West. Her mother liked to say that Mark's hometown was middle America with a beach. The Big Lawless family had seemed like a gift at first. There was refuge in numbers and traditions, so different than her own on the other side of the country. It was exactly what Marjorie needed back then, even though those assets had eventually become liabilities, as they do in nearly 2 decades of marriage. Marjorie listened as the echo of the wild Pacific barreled through the yard from a distant western corner of the sky, waxing and waning in volume and intensity, whether the tide was rising closer or drifting away. But it was also always rising, wasn't it? Isn't that what kept her up? 2 steps forward with fury, 1 step back, low with ebb. the peaceful proceeding of time that she longed for during the day and feared at night. A fire had been burning north for several days, but the wind was going the other way. As the sun rose, Marjorie could see the hazy red clouds in the distance above her, but above her it was clear skies. They said wildfire rumbled like a freight train, but so did the sea, she thought as she listened to the call and response of the breakers, the waves of sound that layered the valley at 4:53 California time. Giving into the temptation of screens, Marjorie noticed her father's name in the text message notifications on her phone. Mom's in the hospital, please call her. And there next to it, her sister Monica's name. Her first thought was, be any moment now for Monica in Baltimore. The day was already underway on the East Coast. Mom's always in the hospital. That was Monica on the group text. Ouch, Marjorie responded privately. I'm sure she'd really appreciate hearing from you both, said their father in the group text. Didn't matter. It was still only 5:13 California time and she was off the hook for another couple hours. She was studying her calendar when she saw the call come in. You're up early, Monica said on the other end of the line. Can't sleep. Haven't slept in a while now. Outside the sliding glass door, the sun was preparing for its daily passage from the patio to the palm in the southwest corner of the yard. Did you try getting up? They say to get up and do something if you can't sleep. Getting up, not the rest of it. It seems so pointless. Mom's in the hospital again, Monica sighed. Marjorie could hear the wail of a siren in Baltimore and paused to let it pass before responding. I haven't called her yet, though. It's the same as usual. Nothing's really wrong. She's just manipulating us. That's harsh, Monica. I'm sure it's not like that. It's always like that, Marge. What did Dad say? Same. He wants us to crowd around her and prop her up in her time of need. But it's always her time of need, especially if she feels like everyone else has something going on. And there he is, putting aside his needs, enabling her. I'm so glad I'm not married. You've been to too much therapy, Marjorie said. But she agreed about their mother and father, even if she never said it. One volatile and concerned with ego and loyalty, the other conciliatory and codependent. Marjorie knew this dynamic well. Sometimes when she and Mark fought, he hurled words at her like a cruel person might hurl shoes at a dog. Gloves off, swinging, just to cut her down to size. And for her part, her silence. Good middle-class Catholic manners from her father, and from her mother, the bottomless desire for dignity of the Jews. Either served her well in times of suffering, and she was sympathetic to her father's need for country above party to maintain the peace. With this family, I need therapy, Monica exclaimed. My therapist says I need to drop my expectations that people won't be in their own narcissistic dramas all the time. Is that what you think I'm doing? You're out there in paradise, kid, husband. You don't see it the way I do. You're not here. I'm here every day. I'm not in paradise, that's for sure. It seemed to Marjorie that Monica had chosen to be there. She could have moved. Everyone expected her to abdicate and for Marjorie to come back. And yet here she was, 20-some years later, still 2,800 miles from home, her clock permanently set to the Eastern Standard. I was in the hospital room with her last time. You should have seen it. She was hooked up to all these monitors, eating fucking Jell-O like she's going into surgery or something. And the doctor comes in and says they can't find anything wrong with her. And you know what she said? She wasn't relieved. She asked if she could stay another night. Marjorie sank into the couch and listened for the morning doves. Not much she could do from here anyway. Monica was right about that. I'll call her as soon as we're off, she said, walking to the fireplace to rest her elbow on the mantel. There was a photograph of her and Sloane when Sloane was 3. In the photograph, Marjorie was beaming, dark hair in a wet tangle and sun-warmed skin, holding Sloane in her lap. I'm off, Monica said and ended the call. Marjorie was tired. This was one of the worst curses of sleeplessness, the feeling of exhaustion during the day while wired open to the whims of the sky at night. Instead of calling her mother as she promised, Marjorie crawled back into bed beside Mark, trying to nuzzle under his left arm splayed to the side as he slept on his stomach. The arm was like a dead weight, and she settled for the space below against his ribcage and rubbed the palm of her hand against his lower back. He rolled over onto his left side away from her. It had been months since they made love, but she let it go even though it burned in the particular way that rejection took hope and crushed it into an earthy, bitter juice. It was hard to say how she knew it was with malice, the punishment of withholding, except that it was. When she found porn in the browser history, she knew that he was not just avoiding sex altogether. He was just avoiding her. In the beginning, the sex had been eager and often. He was nearly 10 years older, but at 25, it had seemed like a good thing. Now she was 42, and hormones and work and the kid and a big intrusive family were all good reasons not to, and the bed was only hot with her own midnight sweats. Delphine.
Great. Oh, that was wonderful, Laysha. I love the way it just builds as you go along.
Thank you.
So thank you both, Mary and Laysha. And I'm looking for Mary to come back. There she is. Okay. So we have a couple of questions, and one for Laysha at this point and one for Mary. I'll start with the one for Laysha since you just read. The question is, do you think Marjorie buries what she thinks she sees regarding Ben because her economic well-being is at stake?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably for a lot of reasons, like seeing the model of her parents, just trying to keep the peace. And yeah, a lot of her life is really dependent on her husband and his family at that point.
Okay. And okay, so then we've got probably more questions than we have time for, which is lovely. But let me do the one that came in first for Mary, which says, if I can keep this open. Mary, I love that your Claire can't hear what Ray is saying. Was there a question of writing this in the first person? She's just curious.
Okay, well, that's a good question. One of the things that happens in writing fiction is you have to figure out what the point of view is. I mean, that's one of the major techniques of telling your story. So this novel first began, it's changed so much in so many ways, but the point of view is a major change. It began as a third person point of view, a close third person solely from Claire's point of view. Right now, it is told in 4 points of view, all first person. Claire, her stepdaughter, Danielle, Ray, and her husband, Martin. And the reason why I chose that multiple point of view and first person, first person just fit better for me than I didn't want to do an omniscient point of view because I was focusing on really developing each one of these characters, and they're all they're entwined in Claire's dilemma, of the secret that she's kept, and it threatens her marriage. It threatens her emotional stability. To have Ray back in her life. He doesn't know she had his child when he left the United States for Canada to avoid Vietnam, and she never has told her husband either. It's been this secret that she's kept. And Claire's story is like the story of 2.5 million American women who who were sent away by their families to homes for unwed mothers between 1950 and the time of Roe v. Wade. And they gave up their children to other people. And some of them just, didn't, some of them never connected with them, and some of them did, and some of them told people their stories, and some of them didn't. I knew women who were in this situation, and that's sort of what prompted me to write this. But I wanted the fact that here's Claire with this secret, and she's got to deal with these other people who are the main characters in her life, and she's been dishonest with all of them, and she has to work that out, and they have to react to that. And I felt that that was using this multiple point of view, first person voices was the most effective way to really show how these people were affected by what happened and how they come to some sort of, acceptance and understanding of what happened to her, and how she accepts that she didn't have choices and now she does have choices in her life. So that's a complicated blah.
So we have a couple of minutes left, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of you, somebody put up a question that would take hours to respond to. So I'm going to ask it and give you each like a minute. So she asks, what themes and questions do you like to explore in your fiction? Laysha, do you want to go first?
Oh no, I have to go first.
No, you don't have to. Mary can go first because it's just
Okay,
keep
mine's
it.
Well,
easy
no, I
because
thought it was interesting just, listening to what Mary was saying and about the question that I was asked, just, about the choices that women have, now and in
Yeah.
the past. And, and I think, what Mary was saying, I thought was really important about pregnancy and abortion and, choices that we, now think we have that we may not have in the future. And, Marjorie too, I think is in a situation where things are not as they appear, and her just having your reality undermined, I think is just a really important thing to explore in fiction for, certainly for specific groups.
right, right. I pretty much write about families, I think. I mean, I wrote my memoir as a family memoir, and I'm just interested in family dynamics. So that's basically it. I mean, relationships, but family being the primary one.
I'm laughing because I was a family therapist for quite a long time, and I
Yeah,
think you
my
will
brother's
you will
one.
have you will be able to write for the rest of your life, right up
I know.
to the
I got a
end
lot
with
of
that
material.
topic. Right. So thank you, Mary and Laysha. They're both wonderful
Thank you for
readings,
doing this.
and for your
Thank you for
comments at
Writers'
the
Room.
end. Yeah, and I thank the Writers' Room, and I want to give special thanks to the board president of the Writers' Room, who is backstage tonight. He is
Yay,
both
Mark.
producing and doing the technical. So
Yep.
thank you, Mark.
And I'm so happy to read with you, Laysha, and
Yeah,
happy
really
that you're
honored.
on the board also.
Thank you.
So I want to let everybody know to stay tuned. Our next reading is October 27th, and we have Laura Vandenberg, who's a fiction writer, and Max Gladstone, who is a writer of, in his words, my weird law wizard religion justice books. So stay tuned for those two. And otherwise, good night, readers and listeners. And thank you so much for coming. And we hope you'll
Thank
all
you,
keep coming.
everyone, for being
We'll
here.
have one reading a month. Thanks. Good night, everybody.